In this video, we're going to talk about one of my favourite features of the MLS-X1 and the accompanying ICP-X7000 panel, and that is the Crosspoint pad. Now, you get a Crosspoint pad on each of the Crosspoint modules. Its primary function is to control the operation of the module, but it can do a lot more. Lots of operators on XVS really enjoy using this pad and customizing it to their needs, and the MLS takes it even further. And I'm going to walk you through just some of the things you can do with it. So first of all, this is the default factory setting for the Crosspoint pad on its home page. We have delegations for the top rows here, such as key 2. I can change to key 3, and that's reflected there. And back to key 2. You'll have seen that in the panel overview video earlier in this series. I can also, on a bank with multi-program 2 enabled, change to the sub-ME and back to the main ME, and you can see that's also reflected there. And I've also got Crosspoint holds for the A and B bus, if I so wish. On another page, by default, I have Crosspoint holds for all my other buses, which I can turn on or off as well. That's all how it comes out of the box, and that's what will happen when you first set up your switcher. However, there's quite a lot of things you can do in the menu to enhance the operation here and improve what you're doing on the switcher. So if we come over to the menu, under Setup and Panel, we can go to the Module menu, and you'll get this nice visual representation of your panel. And you can see that each module is there. That's the end of the Crosspoint module, FlexiPad, the transition module for each ME, and our extra additional modules as well. So if I go into Program Preview Main and Subs Crosspoint module, it'll jump me to this menu. What this is a representation of the hardware panel in software for you to work with. I can select multiple banks at a time if I wish and want to make changes to all of them, but in this case we're just going to focus on the Program Preview pad. First of all, there are 14 pages, and I can access those with the page change button at the top, which also has a home button and an exit button to go back to the page I was on. The naming of each page is customizable in the menu, as well as all the buttons on it. So first of all, let's look at our home page. We can see here in the button assign menu a rough explanation of what each button is doing. For example, the top left button is showing us the assigned status of row 1, which is showing us that key 1 is assigned to row 1. That's mirrored down the left for row 2, row 3 and row 4. We can see row 3 and row 4 Crosspoint hold on there, and that's our 2 Crosspoint hold buttons there, which also indicate when they're switched on. And you can see the macro attach enable function is included too, to turn on or off attached macros on the Crosspoint module. Main and sub are also there and controllable. On the right hand side, you'll see jump page assign. This is the same pad again, and it is showing us which buttons on the pad have what we call a jump page attached. A jump page will do exactly what it sounds like, jump to a page when the button's pushed. We use that for our key delegates. So for example, the top left button will jump to page 2, which is row 1 delegate. So when I hit it, the Crosspoint pad is actually jumping to page 2 and offering me all of the sources that I could switch onto row 1. Again, these are user customizable, but out of the box, you'll get your keys and utility buses. So we're on key 1. Now, the first thing we can do is make a change so that when we delegate the bus, the jump page will take us back home, because what we want to do is change the key and then go straight back home to where we started. So what I can do is I can go to page 2, because this is all user customizable, and I can add some jump pages to home. And I do that just by using the jump page side of the menu and adding a home shortcut to each one. And you'll see that as I do so, a white box appears around the text. The white box is indicating that a jump page is attached to that button. So I can simply add a home jump to all of these buttons, so that now whenever I select any of the keys, my Crosspoint pad goes straight back home, ready to go. So that's an easy early tweak to get a feel for the Crosspoint pad, but there's lots more we can do too. So let's go to a blank page and start thinking about some things we could do. So page 12 is blank, and there it is. I'm going to rename page 12. I'm going to call it Custom Macro, which is displayed at the top there. This is now my page to do with whatever I please, and I can start assigning buttons. So on this button here, I'm going to click it, and I've got a huge array of functions available. Lots of these are for changing the buses on the Crosspoint module. You can do auxes, you can do keys, you can do other functions too, but we're going to go over to the table macro side, hit macro, and we're going to choose a macro. I'm going to use macro 4 which is my clip wipe. I'm going to hit OK. And you'll see straight away my macro's there. And it will run just like a macro anywhere else on the switcher, and it will transition between sources. I'm also going to add my box macros from the macro video earlier underneath by going to macro 2 for box in and macro 3 for box out. And I've got them at my fingertips. Box in and box out and clip wipe. Now I don't need to use my FlexiPad, I can use that for snapshots or something else. I've put them right on my Crosspoint pad where I need them. So how do I get to that page in the show? So I've got a blank button in the bottom right corner here, and I'm going to add a jump page to that. That's in the bottom right corner of the menu, and you can see that I now have my custom macro page on page 12, and that's got a ring around it, and that will go to it. So to add some text to that button, I'm going to insert a blank macro I created earlier, which I've named new page, and that will appear on the button. So now when I hit that button, my pad will jump to my new page that I've just created. And I've got loads of options there, clip wipe, box in, box out, and I could fill this with effects to my heart's content. I might also want to go back to my home page and have a look at key 1 again, because sometimes I might not need to change key 1, but I might want to do some aux buses. So I can change the function of some of these buttons to operate, say, an aux bus or a utility bus. So I'm going to change some of that now. So on page 2, which is our row to assign, I'm going to take out DME external because I don't need that for this program. And I'm going to change to an aux bus. So I go to row 1 aux and I have all of my auxes available to me, and I'm going to pop aux 1 on there. And I'm going to do the same for aux 2 on the bottom underneath, and aux 3 as well. I'm also going to add jump pages to the home page on all of those, so just like my keys, we go back home every time we change it. Now when I hit that button, this stripe has turned to aux 1. If I cut around on the top row of buttons here, you can see I'm now switching aux 1 directly, just like if I was controlling an aux bus, except I'm able to do it on row 1. I can then change that back to key 1, and we're back in a normal mode. So I've already customized the functionality of the first row to do exactly what I want. But how about I need some more macros? I filled my pad and I still need more. Well, I don't use key 2 either. So on key 2, I'm going to change it to utility/shot box 1. What that's essentially doing is changing this row of buttons, row 2, into a utility module that functions similar to the one up here. So with the second row set to utility shot box mode, I can go to the display mode page and change it to macro row 2. You'll now see that the OLEDs have split, the bottom half being the program sources available to me, and the top half being whatever is attached on row 2, which is currently nothing, hence the stars throughout. We're now going to add something to that. So over in the panel module and then Crosspoint module page, you can see utility function assign is selected, and we have bank 1. We're going to work with bank 1 for now, but you can use 2, 3 and so on as well. I'm going to add an action to button 1. I've got the options for utility command, macro recall, shotbox recall, or panel memory recall. In this case, we're going to do a macro, and I'm going to do macro number 4, which was our clip wipe. You'll see if you have a look, we now have a clip wipe button here. The OLED indication is showing us what's there, and when I hit it, that macro will fire. That's now what that row is doing for us, and I can attach anything anywhere. Now, another useful thing we can do here is a menu shortcut, and that means any one of these buttons can jump my linked menu to a particular page. If I turn on menu shortcut, you'll see a flashing on that row. That indicates we're ready to record a menu shortcut. So if I navigated to a menu, let's say ME1 key 1, say I want some shortcuts to control my keys. I go to the menu I want and I hit a button. Now by default it'll just say 19 and take me back there. I can name that, which is really useful. If I go back to Crosspoint module, I find the menu shortcut I've just recorded on 19. I can turn off the menu shortcut button first to stop the flashing, and then I can label that ME1, and then I'll do a vertical line to indicate the carriage return key. You'll now see I have an ME1 key button there, and when I hit it, the menu jumps back to that page I was on. So that's a really good way of grabbing menus that you might need on air and putting them close to hand, if you so wish. For now, I'm going to go back to key 2 there, and I can also go back and change my display mode to source only and unsplit the OLEDs. Another useful thing we can do with the Crosspoint pad is use it to change these bottom two rows of buttons to do something other than A and B. So as you can see in this example, my ME1 stripe has key 1, it currently has key 4, so we'll change that to key 2, and we can change the other ones to be key 3 and key 4 instead of A and B. Now that's really useful because we have some random boxes on screen here, and that way, as an operator, I can punch in all of the boxes on the panel simultaneously without jumping between key layers. I'm using all of that space to control all of the boxes together, which is much easier for me as an operator. To do that, I need to turn on a mode called Free Assign. Free Assign allows me to attach any bus to any of the 4 button rows rather than locking me into certain program preview combinations. So it opens up a lot of power and flexibility when paired with the Crosspoint pad. To turn it on, I go to the panel menu, Crosspoint module, and go to operation mode. You can see I can pick ME1 and I put it in Free Assign mode. That allows me to have full control of that. In fact, there's even a Free Assign menu option which allows me to change the assigned buses on a certain ME direct from the menu if I haven't built buttons for them. So I could change the bottom row to key 8, for example, straight from the menu, and you can see that it's now key 8. I'm going to go back to key 4 for now. There are some other operation modes we can run through. The one I'll touch on here is key delegate and aux mode. That essentially turns the top stripe into a delegation type system. I'll show you down here to make it nice and easy. So the top row is delegating which bus I'm changing. You can see over here in the key delegation and aux assign menu, I can show you that delegation 1 is aux 1, aux 2, aux 3, and then we go on to key 4, key 5. So my first delegation is aux 1, and I can change sources, or I can come over and start changing a key as well. You can see in this square here exactly which source I'm delegating at which time. And we can go through all sorts of sources on the switcher, such as other auxes, and use the menu to control which ones. So that's just another way of using the Crosspoint module depending on how big your panel is and how many different buses you need to change on air. That's just an introduction into what we can do with the Crosspoint pad, and you will definitely find other more interesting ways to use it as you work with the MLS platform. So I would encourage you to experiment and see what works for you.